This one out. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe if you like our content, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. What a memorable afternoon for three legends of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, two of them remaining with the Penguins, one of them on the other side. And that is, of course, Marc-Andre Fleury. The Penguins' longtime netminder, now Minnesota Wild netminder, played his final game against the organization that drafted him back in 2003, and he spent 13 years as their starting netminder. However, his old buddies, Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, they decided they were going to spoil the parade, and the Penguins take the final matchup against Fleury by a final score of 3-1. Now, Fleury was not bad in this matchup. In fact, he was pretty solid throughout most of the game, making 19 saves on 21 shots. But unfortunately for him, it was his old friends that just seemed to know where the weak spots were. First, it was Evgeni Malkin who opened up the scoring midway through the second period on the power play. A shot came in from Kris Letang, redirected by Malkin, and Fleury was able to make the first save, but Malkin knew second shot 5-hole was going to be susceptible for Marc-Andre Fleury, and he squeaked it in to open up the scoring in the Penguins' favor. Then, about midway through the third period of play, Sidney Crosby scored what would eventually be the game-winning goal with a fluttering redirected puck that was able to get right past Marc-Andre Fleury, giving it a 2-0 lead, for the Penguins before Crosby eventually added in the empty netter to make it the final score 3-1 Penguins over Marc-Andre Fleury and the Minnesota Wild. Fleury, after the game, of course, in a joking manner, said, "Oh my God, anyone but these two. I feel like I'm going to hear about this for a long time." Sid is still talking about his goal in juniors against me. He was lucky too. He missed the shot. It hit Brock Faber's stick. Are you kidding me? So a little bit of ribbon back and forth between Fleury and Sidney Crosby, and that could continue now, honestly, forever and ever, amen, because they won't face each other in the NHL again. Marc-Andre Fleury finishes his career as the Penguins franchise leader in games played among goaltenders with 691 as a member of the Black and Gold, 375 wins, goals against average of 258, and shutouts with 44. The next closest in that category specifically is 22 with Tom Barrasso. So twice as much as anybody else in the history of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. And of course, you have to throw in that he is a 3-time Stanley Cup champion. So a hat tip to Marc-Andre Fleury, a nice moment between he and his former teammates yesterday in that final matchup. And this is exactly what the Pittsburgh Penguins have kind of had to fall back on over the last couple of seasons. They haven't played in playoff hockey. They've gone through long stretches of just playing flat out poor hockey, but it's the moments that are kind of highlighting the Pittsburgh Penguins seasons. And most of those moments are being provided by Sidney Crosby, by Evgeni Malkin, and by Kris Letang. And today, or I should say yesterday, it was provided by another good friend of theirs in Marc-Andre Fleury. So another hat tip to Fleury, a great career, one of my all-time favorites, and one of the best in the history of the Pittsburgh Penguins. But I will say this, while it was his old friends that stole the show when it came to the one-on-one matchup, it was the goaltender on the other side that stole the show, I think, in general. And that other goaltender was none other than Tristan Jarry, playing in his first game since January 14th, and he looked tremendous in this one. The best that Tristan Jarry has looked all season. Now, you could have the argument that earlier in the year when he had I believe it was 30-save victory over the Boston Bruins on the road at TD Garden, giving up one goal, you could argue that was his best. But considering what he has gone through since then, since that game in, I believe it was November, this is the most impressive performance of Tristan Jarry's season. 29 saves on 30 shots on goal from the Minnesota Wild. And I understand they're missing a couple key pieces. They're missing Kirill Kaprizov, who was on an MVP pace before he went down with an injury. They're missing one of their big centers in Joel Eriksson Ek. But at the same time, he had to be good. He had to be good, especially early, which is a tough task if you look at what Tristan Jarry has suffered throughout this season. He struggled coming out of the gate, and he had to be good early because that's when Minnesota was at their best. And fortunately, that's when Tristan Jarry was at his best as well. The only goal that he gave up was on a terrific shot on a 4-on-1 that really, I know we're not trying to make excuses for these guys, but that 4-on-1 should have been nullified by an interference call, especially considering the call that put them on the power play was interference on Evgeni Malkin, and it was exactly the same thing when it came to the goal that was scored against Tristan Jarry. So even that goal, perfectly placed shot on a 4-on-1, you don't leave that against Tristan Jarry. It was a tremendous performance in Jarry's not only first game since January 14th, but first win since December 23rd of 2024. You would imagine that a performance like that is going to earn him a few more kicks at the can here coming down the stretch. The Penguins have 16 games remaining, and maybe, just maybe, Tristan Jarry can give them a little bit of confidence going into the offseason. I'm not going to get too ahead of myself because it was one performance, but like I mentioned, we've seen since this contract was signed, not just this season, but since Tristan Jarry signed this 5-year contract, glimpses, very short, very sporadic glimpses, but glimpses nonetheless of the Tristan Jarry that might be worth the 5-year, $5+ million contract. It hasn't been nearly enough, certainly not this season, but we got a glimpse of it yesterday. Can he stack performances going forward? That's what I want to see out of Tristan Jarry. We know he has it in him now. He had it in him in Minnesota. Is he going to have it in him through the remaining schedule for the Pittsburgh Penguins? And will they give him the opportunity to showcase that in the final 16 games? The Penguins are back in action tomorrow night against the Vegas Golden Knights back at PPG Paints Arena as they look to avenge their 4-0 loss from Friday night on trade deadline day. We'll see who's in net for that one, but the Penguins will look to make it 2 in a row and try to gain a little bit of momentum here down the stretch to just give themselves some confidence going into the 2025 offseason. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.